It all set up. Okay, so good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining this talk. So I'm going to actually try and bring some of the stuff together from the two talks this morning and see about how can we find the right balance in terms of the technology enhanced learning that that's been talked about this morning, and the stuff that we're going to use in both our teaching and our learning. So you've had two very good talks this morning about humanizing technology enhanced learning and what sort of things we can utilize in terms of the tools for technology enhanced learning as well. So I'm going to think about when should it be used. So Dr. Bhavani kind of started introducing some aspects of this about when should we use technology enhanced learning, when potentially a more traditional method's better, okay? Because technology should enhance our learning and be used to improve the way in which we teach and learn. But if there are more traditional methods that still work, then we shouldn't just ignore them as well. And is there such a thing as too much technology enhanced learning? Where do we get overwhelmed from this as well? So I want to sort of stimulate a discussion of how and when we should implement technology in our learning to enhance our learning and enhance the way in which we teach our students as well. I want to encourage us all to sort of take a step back as well and evaluate both from a teaching point of view and from a learning point of view as to why are we using this technology, both in our teaching, but also in the way that we learn as well. Are we using enough or are we using too much of technology in our teaching and learning? And then Bhavani kind of touched on this towards the end in terms of design a curriculum around technology, is how might we use technology for the benefit? So how do we pick the right technology for the benefit of teaching and learning and not be drawn into the idea of just using technology because it's there? So I am actually going to use some technology in this session. And this was actually mentioned by Dr. Bhavani as well. So I'm going to give you a moment or two. If you can go to ra.ombia.com. So if you've got a mobile device ready, if you've got a space open in your browser, just it's a web-based process. And then once you get to that website, you can type in the session ID HubTalk. This is my personal account that we got through the university. It's not case sensitive, so don't worry about putting in the capital letters. And on the next slide, we're going to use this, do a little bit of polling. And I was quite happy when Bhavani said that that the use of Ombia and Socrative and those kind of devices is very top of the students' enjoyment of technology in learning. So we're going to experience that in this session as well. So if I go on to the next slide, what I'd like to know, and this should hopefully sort of influence the way in which I sort of teach this session or talk about this session, the way I sort of direct this session, is, are you a student or a learner? Are you an educator, a lecturer, a teacher? Is your main role sort of educational support, or is there other roles that you have as well? And that will give me an idea of the sort of makeup of this session and see whether I need to sort of focus towards one area or another area, or whether I should do a very broad way in which I sort of discuss this session as well. But also it gives you an example of the interactive nature of technology, and the way we can use technology to interact with the people that we are working with as well. So there are around about 50 people in this session, but normally when we do this to students that know this system, we generally only get about sort of half of the individuals interacting with as well. So I'm taking my time with this one because it gives a chance for people to find the websites and find a mobile device and log in. So we're actually up to 13 responses at the moment. So we'll see if anybody wants to get their final answer in. Just put their answer in now and see if we get any more coming through. If not, I'm going to move on, but there's going to be a few more questions as we go through this session, as we're going to stop at key points and think about, well, how do we utilize technology in our learning? So if you haven't sort of found the site yet and logged in, do so in the meantime, and then we'll see how we get on later on as well. So there will be further questions as well. Okay, I'll have a quick jump up at the end as a couple more people logged in as well. So looking at the breakup of this, so it looks like we've got a majority educators in this session, with some people in educational support and some people who are learners, and then with some people that don't fit into those categories as well. So I will try to keep it relatively broad, and I think with the balance, it is easy to sort of move towards educator, lecturer, and teacher, and sort of think about, well, how do we as educators and sort of bring in technology into our teaching and learning. But I will move it towards students as well, and think about how we might support students in our teaching and learning. So I'm going to sort of think about, how confident do you feel using technology? Because again, from the study that Dr. Bhavani did, there was some discussions there about the fear of using technology and the fear of whether that technology would work or not in your teaching and learning. I think that is correct. That is a barrier to a lot of people using technology in their learning, especially when we're often getting assessed and get feedback from students. And if something goes wrong, that could affect the feedback that we get from students in terms of it could damage our confidence in our teaching and the way in which we teach and the way in which we learn. But also, if you are a learner, how do you utilize technology in the way in which you go about learning, and how confident are you in using technology in your learning? Okay, so we've got a few more people coming in now, which is great. So I'm going to have a quick close of this question, have a look, see how sort of confident people are with this. So that's an interesting thing. So it's nice to see that nobody put down D. So everybody has a little bit of confidence. Some people are a little bit worried about using technology. So hopefully when we get towards the end of this session and some of the things that we talk about in this session, you start to think, well, maybe I can move myself up a notch from slightly worried into slightly more confident, or slightly more confident to being a bit more confident, or very confident in the way that I utilize technology. Because it's all about thinking about the type of technology and getting the balance right in terms of what technology I do use, what do I choose, and what do I not use in my teaching and learning. Okay, great. So I think one thing that could be considered is there's an awful lot out there that can consider technology enhanced learning. And I think there is, in the current environment, the risk of thinking of online learning and the way in which you utilize online learning is the only way in which we can use technology in our learning. So a lot of this stuff is like asynchronous online teaching as well, activities, synchronous online teaching, virtual learning environments, mobile apps that are used, those kind of things as well. But also we have to think about utilizing technology in our face-to-face sessions as well, that physical technology, lab-based technology. I'm from medical schools and biomedical sciences. So I'm thinking in terms of lab-based technology, simulation that we use in medicine, a simulation mannequin that simulates a patient is technology enhanced learning. It's not just about online teaching and online learning. So think about the broad aspects of what we mean by TEL. But I understand, because we've moved so quickly into fully online and hybrid approach to teaching, that most of us think of technology enhanced learning at the moment has been online teaching and online processes, but there's more to it than that as well. So we can utilize technology in our teaching and learning without having to do it online. But when is it too much? So I've got this example here. So we've talked about Teams. I'm sure most of you have sort of engaged with or know of Teams and have had Teams meetings over the past couple of years. This was very good when it first came along. So a couple of years ago, we were thinking, oh, great, this is a really good interactive tool, work with our peers, work with our students. We develop communities of practice, discussion groups. Now we're starting to find it too much overwhelming. I have personally 58 active Teams groups and 15 groups I've hidden because they're not so active. They're kind of in the past, may prop up at some point in the future. And for me, that's overwhelming. And I don't use this application Teams in the way that I did when I first started using it 2 years ago. It's not as useful to me now as it was 2 years ago because it's just simply too much information, too much going on at any one moment in time. Anybody that knows Teams will notice there's quite a lot of stuff that's bold in text. And that means I've not actually read most of that stuff because it's just too much going on, too many activities, and I don't have time to keep up with everything that's going on around that. So I've noticed both here and also in the UK, people are now sort of moving away from Teams because it has become so overwhelming and it's hard to find information, hard to utilize effectively. So when does technology in our teaching and learning become too much? When does it become overwhelming in terms of the way in which we work? But also, which technology do we utilize? There's so much out there. At Newcastle University, we're quite privileged in that our university does actually subscribe to quite a number of technology, and they support at a faculty level and a university level. So Bhavani mentioned Recap, our lecture recording software. We have a reflective software. We use Ombia that's integrated into our systems. Bhavani mentioned Canvas as a VLE, but we also have other technology to help us with generating resources like H5P, assessment-related resources, peer-related resources, online teaching resources. So our faculty, our university is very good at supporting us with a suite of technology that we can utilize in our teaching, but also for students in their learning as well. But there's also a lot of other stuff out there, sort of commercial and external technology. So when do we use that commercial, that external technology that's not supported by our university? So there are positives to that in that we can utilize stuff that's very interactive, very engaging. There are negatives to that in that if it's not supported by your faculty, by your university, then if things go wrong, they're less likely to be able to solve it for you and help you with that or give you training on it as well. And also we're bringing in more examples of technology for our students that maybe that you utilize on your own, but other people don't utilize. And again, switching between different types of technology could become confusing. You have too many different systems, too many bits of software that you use. And again, it becomes problematic, overwhelming, and hard for students to work to, as well as staff as well. So what TEL do we use, which TEL do we use, and how do we balance that? So I'm going to ask you a little text-based one now. So I think Bhavani covered a couple of the barriers and potential problems that we have with using technology, and Dr. Seifel mentioned a few things as well. So just one word, which particular problem or issue do you think that you have in particular in relation to using technology, either in your teaching or in your learning? So I'm going to give this a few moments long because it takes a bit longer for people to sort of log in and type in a response to this. So I've got one response so far. Yeah, we got a few more responses coming in now. Excellent. So this is one of the things that you have to wait a little bit longer for people to think about what they want to say and then add it in to tell. And when I'm teaching, don't be afraid. I'm not afraid of the odd silence here and there when we're sort of asking students to do things and giving time for people to sort of process the question and come up with a potential solution. Okay, so we've got 11 responses so far. That's good. So I'm going to close this now and see what sort of things people have as their kind of main problems or issues with utilizing technology in their either learning or in their teaching. Okay, good. So, okay, we've got things like technology-based in terms of hardware-based, like slow internet, slow computer. That all links into accessibility in terms of how you access stuff. There's that, again, that gap between our lecturers actually any good at teaching, utilizing technology. How do we get all our students to participate in technology? And then we have the kind of, it's too much. We get overwhelmed, we get anxiety from utilizing technology in both our learning and our teaching. So that links that multiple software as well. How do we focus on the ones that are useful and the ones that will enhance technology, learning and teaching, rather than just using all the various things that are available and not making a very good job of it? So good. So accessibility is one of the things that's mentioned by Dr. Seifel and by Dr. Bhavani as well. And that, I think, is one of the major problems with technology in learning, is that accessibility. So first of all, we've mentioned, we think of students as being digital natives, as Dr. Bhavani mentioned, but we still have that issue that not all students have the tech. We want to create an inclusive environment, and by using technology, are we reducing that accessibility by excluding those few students that don't have the up-to-date technology? Slow computer was mentioned on the previous slide. Okay, if you have a slow computer, if you don't have the latest laptop or tablet computer, is that going to hinder your ability to access technology enhanced learning? And we do have a small number of students that do have that problem and not be able to access the right technology. Is it accessible in terms of how we utilize it? So there's a big thing in the UK about making sure that all of our resources are accessible, that they have captions if you are doing recordings, that you utilize the right color scheme so that people with dyslexia can actually read the information and don't have that problems with different color backgrounds and lack of contrast. And again, down to student accessibility is external resources. If we start using external resources, they come with a cost as well that's maybe not supported by the university. So we have to be very careful in terms of our accessibility with our technology and making sure that stuff we utilize is available to all of our students. Then is cognitive load. Now, I kind of alluded to this at the start with my little example of teams. And for me, that does generate cognitive overload. Okay, and I can be working at my desk during the daytime, and I can have somebody email me on one point. I can have someone send me a message through Teams. I can have somebody even utilize WhatsApp to contact me at the same time, and I'm getting multiple inputs from multiple areas, people contacting me about various things, and that generates cognitive overload, and I struggle to respond to all those things at the same time. We have the same problem with technology and the way we utilize technology. So this cognitive load theory is that learners have a finite capacity for working memory. Don't give students too much at the same time when you're teaching through technology. And as a learner, don't try to utilize too much at the same time. Don't have too many apps open at the same time, because that you all have that finite capacity for working memory. And that's to do with the biology of the brain and nothing else. So that digital technology, we do have that potential to very, very quickly overload learning capacity, either through the use of too many different types of technology in our teaching and learning, or having too much going on at the same time, and it inhibits and it reduces the effectiveness and efficiency of both our teaching and our learning as well. So that's the sort of quick question I asked. How many different programs do you have open on your computer right now? So I can be at work and I can have 7 or 8 different applications over, and I can have on my browser, I can have 20 different tabs open on my browser. And I'm guilty of that as much as anyone else. And that's too much technology, too much input coming through at any one moment in time as well. So another potential challenge is there's always that new piece of technology. Okay, so, and again, Dr. Bhavani talked about this in terms of training of staff, training of students as well. So how do we keep up? It's expensive. It quickly outdates. Quite often the technology that we buy, it takes 1.5 years to actually purchase that information going through the university systems. By the time we purchase it and we start utilizing it in our teaching, has it now become obsolete? Has it become outdated? So we've got to be careful in choosing the type of technology that we utilize to make sure that it's future-proof and it will last at least 5-10 years and doesn't quickly become outdated. So for example, we'd all like to have that sort of wonderful high-tech technology in our teaching and learning, this 3D virtual environment around us. But actually what we end up with is something like this. And I know sort of Google Cardboard is actually quite amazing. It's a really good, cheap way of using it. And it's a shame that Google are stopping supporting Google Cardboard. But we have this aspiration for this high-tech way of working and learning, but restraints in terms of the expenses of it, whether it's actually worthwhile long-term, mean that we tend to go back to slightly less technological enhanced ways of working as well. And then there's that training aspect. How do we keep our training up to date, both for staff? Do we have a core set of technology we utilize, or is there too much technology out there that we don't end up training all of our staff to the right sort of levels? And again, that was mentioned, that first question is, lecturers aren't very good with technology. So there's a lot of technology out there. Do we focus on certain bits of technology that we train up our staff to utilize that can make very good teaching resources, very focused teaching resources, that we do some few things well rather than lots of things badly as well. So cognitive overload is very important, and as something, accessibility is very important, and the fact that we have this constantly changing environment as well. And the final thing I'm going to mention in terms of what I think is potential risks is that altered student-staff relationship. So we talked about with Dr. Seifel the humanizing of technology and online teaching, and how to maintain those interactions between staff and students. So I just got a couple of stock images here of one lecture here looking slightly stressed, talking at a computer, versus a teacher with students looking much more happier in that environment in a laboratory, doing a facilitation of teaching and working together to learn that way. So there is that risk of loss of personal interaction and that increased isolation. And Dr. Seifel mentioned things like we've got to be careful to choose how we teach different aspects. Some of it that's more cognitive can be done online. Some of it that's more effective needs to be done face-to-face on campus together in teaching as well. Okay, so that student-staff relationship has changed as we've moved to that digital environment. I'm sure you've all experienced that isolation over the past 2 years as we've gone more online rather than face-to-face in person. So there's lots of issues, lots of problems. So how do we move forward? How do we get this right? So this is actually a picture of Newcastle in the UK, a quite nice little arty picture of the castle. So here's a bit of the castle over here, a bit more of a keep for the castle in Newcastle on its own. And over in the sort of right-hand side over here, you can just see Newcastle United football ground, who are currently technically the richest club in the world because they've just been taken over by a rich benefactor. So a quick question again. Why do you utilize TEL in your teaching and learning? So again, we're thinking about the use of TEL and getting that balance right. So why do you utilize TEL in your teaching and learning? Is it for efficiency? Is it make it your teaching and learning easier? Is it just simply because it's there? Or do you have pressure from either other students to utilize this bit of technology in your learning? Do you have pressurized from your faculty, from your university to use technology in your teaching? Or do you use it because there is clear evidence behind it, that I'm using this because I know there's evidence to back up this way in which I'm teaching, which way I'm learning, that enhances this process? So quick answer, and then we'll start looking at how do we work through this? How do we develop this? Okay, I got 17 responses. That's pretty good going, actually. So just jumped up to 18 and 19. So get your final answers in, and then we'll have a quick look to see what people have gone for. So interesting. So at least I'm quite happy that D is relatively low. So there's only sort of 10% of you. So 2 of you out of the sort of 20 thought there was pressure from others to use, whether it's faculty or other people. So that's fairly sort of positive. What's probably maybe slightly less positive is people maybe not thinking about research and the evidence behind why they're using that technology to enhance their learning. And I think that 25%, because it's there and available, is sort of maybe a little bit sort of worrying as well, because we've got to think about why we're using this technology and think about how we're using this technology. It goes back to sort of point E as well, that we think about the evidence behind it so that we're using the technology in an appropriate way that is known to improve our learning, to improve our teaching as well. Okay, so that's good. So that's interesting. And I'm glad that the highest thing is that it makes teaching and learning easier, that we're using the technology because of that reason. We want to make teaching easier. We want to make learning easier and more efficient for students. So for me, reasons for using technology to enhance learning. Okay, so think about it and utilize it in the same way as you do any kind of way of developing and designing your learning and teaching. Okay, don't just do it because it's there. Think about what do I want to achieve from this piece of technology that I'm utilizing in my education? Do I want to make this piece of learning very interactive, high fidelity simulation of a real environment? What am I hoping to achieve? Do I just want it to be fun? Because that's fine as well. You know, if it's education is better when it's fun. So I just want to do a little fun aspect in terms of my teaching to engage my students in my learning, or do I want to learn in a fun way? What might be the best way to do this? Do I need to use this piece of technology, or can I actually do it in an old-fashioned way? Or which bit of technology would help me to achieve this in the best way? So don't just use what's available, think about what technology I want to use. And that feeds onto this one. Will that technology that I use enable me to achieve what I want to achieve? Okay, so going back to, we've got access to this bit of technology. I was going to use it because it's there, because now I can say I'm using technology to enhance the learning of my students. But what do I want to achieve with that technology? So I use Omvia quite a lot because I want to be able to gauge the understanding of my students as I'm going through my teaching and modify my teaching in response, directly in response to students' response to those questions. I want to make it interactive, of course, but I want to, in real time, modulate and change the way in which I teach that particular session based on how students respond to those questions. So that sort of brings into that line there. Do not pretend to use technology simply because it's there. Think about why you want to use that technology, what you want to achieve, and how it's going to improve student learning. Or as a learner, how is it going to improve your learning What is it about this technology that you find will actually benefit you in terms of making your learning more efficient and more effective? So that's when we get onto the sort of balancing act. Okay, so how do we balance what technology should be used? And how do we balance that versus too much and too little technology? So what technology should we use? And I think we have to think about this from an institutional level first, in that your institution as a teacher will subscribe to and encourage a range of technology. And I think at Newcastle University, we're quite lucky with that, in that our university does subscribe to a set amount of technology, and they were mentioned at the very start of this talk. And they provide training, mostly to staff at this stage, on the use of this educational technology. Now, whether all of our staff engage with that training is a very different matter, but that training is there. It's provided on multiple occasions throughout the academic year. So from an institutional level, there needs to be a sort of core suite of learning technology that everybody can be trained up on, and that everybody can utilize across the whole of the university, be consistent across the whole of the university. So a core suite of technology for our education. But in terms of training, we often think about training staff, we don't often think about training students. And that goes back to that digital native versus digital migrant sort of process. In that Bhavani mentioned that idea of digital native versus digital migrant. See, I'm slightly upset by that, because technically I'm a digital migrant because I was born about 1 year before the supposed cutoff between digital native and digital migrants. But I grew up as technology grew. I grew up as computers grew. So I feel that I have a relatively good understanding of technology and learning and the background behind it as well. But we assume that students know everything. And as Bhavani mentioned, students may be very good at technology, like having 5 different conversations on 4 different apps on their mobile phone. But are they actually any good in using education-related technology? And the evidence maybe is they're not quite so good at using education-related technology. And then as new technology emerges, then the institution themselves should help to implement that by picking that new technology and helping staff and students to utilize that technology through training, through development in their own learning and teaching as well. And then we can move down to a more sort of school course level. So we can add in a little bit of technology that's very specific to that school or course, subject-specific technology. So in medicine and biomedical sciences, we have this here, which is SimMan. It's going to bring on the spotlight so we can see it. This is SimMan here that we can utilize in high fidelity, safe simulation of patient experiences and patient illnesses. You can kill SimMan. And it's better to kill SimMan in the laboratory than kill a patient in real life. So we can do simulated training of our students through this SimMan process. We have 3D anatomy to help enhance our anatomy teaching. We have physiological monitoring software and technology to do lab-based assessments of physiology. We can test nerve velocity to teach students about conduction velocity in nerves, for example. So that subject-specific technology is very important, and having that targeted subject-specific technology that you utilize in your faculty or in your school or in your course that you develop. And that enhances the teaching of that particular subject on top of the university-wide generic software that we use and technology we use. And hopefully, by having a small amount of this subject-specific technology, staff and students are both familiar with it and are able to utilize it in their teaching. Then at an individual level, think about the way in which you as a person teach, or you as a person learn. What is your teaching philosophy? Why do I teach? Why do I want to teach? So what do I want students to achieve? Or what do I want to achieve as a learner? So think about your own way of learning, your own way of teaching. And then choose that technology that you feel comfortable with. So again, that could get rid of some of the anxiety that people mentioned at the start of this session. We are anxious because of the unknown. We don't know if it's going to work properly, or we don't know if there's going to be problems with this technology. Don't be afraid to try something new, but start with small steps. Start with something you feel comfortable with, simple things, and that you think were beneficial. And then once you gain your confidence, then start moving on to the slightly more complex stuff. So I feel really comfortable with Ombia. So that's probably my main bit of technology that I utilize in my teaching, in my learning, because I'm really comfortable with it. I enjoy it. I like it. It fits in with my own way of sort of teaching and learning, and that kind of interactive way of teaching, that development way of sort of constructivist way for students to sort of think about the way in which they learn. And are others using similar technology? So what if everybody uses different technology? Could that become problematic? Because students as learners then get exposed to far too many types of technology, and they never get to sort of be comfortable themselves with one particular type of technology. I think that goes back to where the institutional level has a set sort of core bits of technology. You can pick from that institutional bit of technology to utilize in your own teaching and learning, so that students themselves are comfortable with that. So we balanced in things like, what technology do we utilize? So thinking about a small bit of technology, what is it I'm using? Is it beneficial to my students? Is it beneficial to learning? Now we're going to balance when. When should we use technology? Should we use it all the time? Should we use it a small amount of time? When? So again, I'm going to ask this question. How would you rate the amount of time that you use TEL for teaching and learning? So when you use technology for teaching and or learning. So I've got too much, too little, just right. And I put a little picture here of Goldilocks and the three bears, which, if I'm honest with you, until I did this talk, I didn't realize this is an old English fairy tale. I thought it was a European fairy tale. This is an old English fairy tale about three bears going to someone's house and stealing their porridge. Well, porridge is too hot, it's too cold, or it's just right. So again, think about your technology and the way you use technology in your teaching and learning. Do you use it too much, or is it taking over your life? Should you maybe embrace it a little bit more? Or do you think you've got the right balance in using that technology in both your teaching and or your learning? Okay, we've got 16 responses, so I'll close this very quickly if anyone wants to get their final answers in before I move on. Okay, let's move on and see what we've got. Okay, good. Well, that's also very, very reassuring that 65% of you, the majority, you think you got it just right. And then, interestingly, we've got an equal number of people who think they're getting too much or too little. So that's probably kind of indicative of the overall environment, in that actually I'm quite a little bit surprised that so many people said just right. That's good. I think that's great that people think they got it right. And it's great that not too many people think it's taken over their life, because I was worried that that would be quite high, that too much would be too high. So that's good. I'm glad that you feel that you got it just about right. So the reason why I asked that question is because there is terminology now coming into the literature called techno stress, digital fatigue. This thing that too much technology reduces productivity, reduces the ability to learn effectively. And we're getting tired of it. We are getting stressed out by overuse of technology. I'm sure you've all had that thing with too much Zoom meetings or too many Teams meetings, and you end the day with extreme tiredness. Your eyes are hurting. You're very fatigued because of that stress and fatigue based on overuse of digital technology. And there's a lot of research about this as well, in terms of both in a workspace and also for students, that if students are engaging in far too much technology, it's not just teaching technology, but utilizing of mobile phones, taking over their life, working till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, watching screens, utilizing a mobile phone, that reduces productivity of students and the ability of students to do well in their studies as well. So it's about trying to manage use of technology so you don't get overwhelmed by that technology. So that's why I'm quite happy that majority of you think you've got it just about right, which is great. So hopefully nobody is suffering from techno stress. And then think about, what can be done about this? So I talked about planning for the use of technology in learning as an educator. And I'm very much into this active versus passive learning, that all of our teaching should be active and encourage active learning of our students rather than passive learning. And I've quoted this paper for about 10 years. It's a very kind of highly scientific paper, but it's a very good paper in terms of talking about the brain, the way the brain works, and that explorative learning, students doing the learning themselves and not us telling them what they need to know, is very much better for their learning than just passive learning. So rather than students copying and pasting stuff and us giving them all of the information that they need, we've got to encourage students to find the information out for themselves, to do the work themselves in a more active way. And that has been shown to improve their teaching. So how do we utilize technology to improve active learning, to increase engagement in our education, in our learning? So it's learner-driven, not staff-driven or teacher-driven. That gives better outcomes if we get learners generating the resources, building up resources, and working collaborative together. I think Bhavani mentioned that as well in her talk as well about student-driven, student-focused, constructivist approach and social constructivism in their learning. So we can use technology to increase engagement and enjoyment. And there's nothing wrong with doing something that's fun in learning. It doesn't all have to be based around assessment and exams. There is a lot of evidence that making something fun increases your ability to learn that topic as well. Okay, and so choose your technology based on this idea that I'm going to use this because it's going to enhance the learning process, not because it's there, not because it's available to me. I'm going to pick this piece of technology based on this understanding of how people learn. I'm going to utilize that for my learning. So things like simulation, the SimMan type thing, gamification, making it fun. Utilize collaborative tools in your technology, whether that's that example of going into a Zoom breakout room and getting students to create a talk or something and then feed back to the group. And that can also be done in face-to-face, well, utilizing collaborative environment and technology in a face-to-face bit of teaching environment as well. So choose your technology based on what you want to do and how it's going to enhance that learning process. Okay, and then I put this in for learners and for students. So there was a question earlier on about that, about increased learning hours and learning time as well. So you as a student, using learning to think ways about being more efficient with the way in which you learn and manage your time to think about whether what you're doing is truly effective. Now, I know of students that can spend 3 hours writing up notes from a teaching session, and they're just copying and pasting huge amounts of stuff from the internet and making a big document full of lots and lots of information. And that's a really inefficient way of learning because you're just gathering information, you're not learning that information. And then when you get back to your time of doing your exams, it's a huge amount of information, cognitive overload again, and you're not going to be able to learn it very effectively at all. So take time away from technology when learning. There's a lot of evidence that's thinking about we can't have technology all the time. Take time away from technology when learning. Think about active technological approaches. So annotating your work digitally rather than copying and paste the information from your teacher. Create your own resources rather than expect us to give it to you as well. I get a lot of questions saying, can you give us this information? Can you? There was one question we had was, under every single PowerPoint slide, could you write a detailed explanation of what's in that PowerPoint slide so that we can just utilize it? That is a really, really bad way of learning, because if you create your learning or resource yourself, you're understanding it a lot better. It's that constructivist approach, okay? If you develop learning from your understanding, it's going to make much better sense and be much more effective. So don't just be tempted to copy and paste those information. You can at risk of using technology for the wrong reasons. So the last area I'm going to really talk about is this old v new. So quickly, because I'm conscious that I've only got a little bit of time left. So do you think that traditional methods of teaching still have a place in modern education? So chalk and talk versus paper and paper exercises versus very much using technology in our teaching and learning. So if you get your answer in fairly quickly, I will move on to sort of a little bit of explanation about this. Okay, good. We're up to 14, so I'm going to stop it there. See what people have gone for. Oh, well, I'm happy with that one. The majority of people think that traditional methods still have this place in modern education. Good. Because this thing came up, I saw this while I was searching for this, because the reason why I searched for this is because in the dental school in the UK, there are still chalkboards in the dental school. And that is because there was one member of staff who would teach anatomy by drawing the anatomy on the chalkboard in front of the students in the lessons. And then when I was searching for a picture of chalkboard anatomy, this came up of a I think it was a teacher from Thailand or Taiwan or somewhere. I can't remember exactly where it was. It might have been Taiwan, who went viral because he was using chalkboard, old-fashioned teaching methods, chalk and talk, to teach anatomy. So they still have these kind of things are available. The old ways still work because they utilize a lot of the brain. This was me planning this talk. I went away from my technology. I sat down with a piece of paper and a cup of tea, and I drew out the sequence of slides for this talk. And that gave me time to think about what it is I want to talk about, what it is I want to express. Old-fashioned piece of paper and a pencil is good. It utilizes a lot of the brain. So I'm a neuroscientist by training. I want to sort of utilize our understanding of how the brain learns in terms of my teaching. And the center point of the brain of learning is called the hippocampus, the learning and memory center of the brain. And it contains connections from all over the brain. So the more aspects of the brain we use, the easier it is to learn. The more modalities, the more sensory modalities we use, sort of touch, sound, vision, doing something, it increases our ability to learn something. And one of the risks of using technology is it becomes too passive. You just watch a video, you just watch a recap of your lecture and you scribble down notes, or you watch a YouTube video, and it's very passive compared to this active approach to learning, which is a much more efficient way of learning. So there's some evidence to back this up as well, in that there's a study by Princeton University about 7 or 8 years ago now, showing that writing notes down is much more efficient and better for your exam performance than typing notes down. Okay, so it utilizes more of the brain. Writing utilizes much more of the brain and gives you high retention rates, stronger learning, more focus and better comprehension of your learning. Although there are some negatives that maybe it's less accurate, that you can't search and find the information back again, but the evidence is that writing something down the traditional way is far better for your learning than typing something on a keyboard and doing it that way. So if you are utilizing typing, annotate something rather than copy and paste or type something. And I think that's probably because our brain, our biology is behind in our technology. Our brain is evolving over time, and it's used to the old-fashioned methods rather than newer methods. So potentially our brain hasn't yet caught up in terms of its learning in relation to the new technology. We can also think about how we sort of disconnect between teachers and learners, because I utilize technology in one way, and I know that our students utilize technology differently to me. Okay, and making that connection is a bit tricky. So how do I, as a learner, as a teacher, who when I was at university, it was all overhead projectors, no recording, write down your notes, no way of seeing it. If you miss that session, that's it, it's too late. No real technology in our learning. So how do we sort of mix that together and get that kind of process, as well as sort of getting that connection between our students and our learners? Maybe we should get our students to be involved in our development of our technology and how we utilize technology as well, and how much of that technology that students use should we utilize in our education as well. I've got a couple of quick examples. I'll run through these fairly quickly of stuff that I utilize to try and get that interactivity. So technology is useful when it's active, collaborative, and creative. Here's an example of me not telling students about lesions of the brain and what it causes. I got students to do that themselves. Then I explained it afterwards. Okay, so use technology influence to do stuff, work it out for themselves, and then explain to aid the understanding as well. Okay, so that kind of active way of teaching and learning. So I use my 2 questions. I use that way of technology because I wanted students to try something out first, figure it out for themselves, that constructivist approach to learning. And then I can help them to say, well, actually, you misunderstood this bit. Here's the explanation. Here's how you work it out. Rather than me just saying, this is what a lesion is. This is what it caused. That's a very passive approach to using technology. So quizzing tools, as I say, I utilize this quizzing tool on BIO quite a lot. Simulation tools, high fidelity, clinical laboratory, courtroom stuff, that sort of thing. Another example of me utilizing a quizzing tool to ask a question, very minimal didactic description, ask the question, do some explanation about how that works as well. Okay, and then gamification, make it fun, make it interesting, online escape rooms. There's an example of that. And then again, Bhavani mentioned the collaborative examples. So in the UK, we have these collaborative rooms, these large open space rooms with a table around a computer. And we utilize those rooms to get students to work in a group, to collaborate on a project on the computer screen, which then could be shared across everyone else in that room as well. Using cloud technology to do collaborative documents as well, so that collaboration gets students working together. Using video technology to create scenarios that might be useful, that collaborative way and creative way of teaching and learning. So why? Well, why do we do this? Because it generates transferable skills. And I think Dr. Seifel mentioned employability skills. We don't know what's going to happen in 10, 20 years' time in terms of technology. So we need to get our students' employability skills up. And one of those things is like collaborative learning, working together, communication skills. So we use these kind of examples, try and train the students up in those transferable skills and those employment skills as well. So they can adapt to the changing environment as it goes forward. So they can adapt when technology changes themselves as they go on. So my final slide here, just before we finish, is about finding that right balance, summary, conclusions, and the future as well. How do we sort of predict the future? So the key points, and I think, again, it was mentioned by my previous 2 speakers as well, about the E refers to enhanced. Okay, so the E intel is enhancing our teaching and learning, not replacing stuff for the sake of replacing it. Okay, so we need to think about how we utilize our technology, use it carefully to make sure it enhances the learning of our students, and as a student, it enhances our learning as well. Make sure it has a purpose. Why are we using it? What's the purpose of this bit of technology? And I think there does need to be that collaboration between staff and students. And I think at Newcastle, we probably haven't got that right yet in terms of our collaboration with students to say, well, what sort of technology do you want us to use and how can we use it in our teaching of you as well? And how can we use it effectively as well? And then finally, the future of technology. Well, it is here to stay, whether we like it or not. But we can't predict where it goes in the future. Hence why it's that developing those all-round skills of our students, that critical thinker that Dr. Seifel mentioned, okay? The ability to adapt, be robust, and be able to change as things change in the future as well. That's communication skills, those transferable skills. We need to use our teaching and our technology to develop those skills in our students. We all need to engage with this technology and use it as best we can. And new technology should be evaluated for its usefulness as well. And I'll throw in one final thing that actually scares me a little bit, and that's the metaverse. If you haven't heard of the metaverse, then this is a kind of all-encompassing environment where you're almost working in a sort of virtual environment as an individual in your learning. And there's talk of bringing the metaverse into teaching and learning. And it's kind of there for some extent with those sort of certain games that individuals play where they are an avatar within a virtual world environment and they're walking around playing that game, interacting with people within that game as well. That is potentially coming to medicine and education as well. And there's a little blog about this if you're interested in saying more about the potential and problems with metaverse. And I have to admit that scares me a little bit, because I don't think I'm ready or prepared for the metaverse at all. Okay, so thank you very much.